It's day 8 of the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, who's accused in the death of George Floyd. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Duffy. And with us today is Dionne Choyce, Sacramento-based criminal defense attorney, and Dr. Ryan Getty, Sac State criminal justice professor who also specializes in police behavior. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Let's first start with a moment from court today. Take a listen.
I'd like you to focus then on the second factor. That is whether Mr. Floyd posed an immediate threat to the safety of the officers or others at the time during the restraint period.
No, he did not.
And why not?
Because he was in the prone position, he was handcuffed, he was not attempting to resist, he was not attempting to assault the officers, kick, punch, or anything of that nature.
And that was LAPD use of force expert Sergeant Jody Steiger weighing in on whether George Floyd posed a threat to Officer Chauvin while he was being restrained. So I'll start with you, Mr. Choyce. What do you make of that, and what have you been paying attention to as you watch this trial?
Well, it's very clear that they're trying to use the proportionality of force as well as looking at the officer's conduct to see whether the force used was reasonable. And the fact that the expert is saying that Mr. Floyd wasn't posing a threat, he was in a prone position, he was handcuffed, all of those things an officer has to take into consideration when exercising the use of force. And I think the prosecution did a good job at using these experts, essentially the upper level police officers in this particular department that are saying, yes, this was excessive, and this is something that we didn't train these officers to do.
And how about you, Dr. Getty? What are you paying close attention to?
The chief's testimony, and they had a commander there that I know of, and other people. I didn't see any rank and file. But mostly it's not holding the thin blue line, is what we call it. And that's usually a departure from any types of prosecutions of police officers.
Yeah, Dr. Getty, I definitely want to get back to that in just a moment. But Mr. Choyce, the other juggernaut in this case, the other thing that most people have seen before this trial actually started was that video of the incident. How powerful is that? And do you think that the defense can actually get around that?
The video is very powerful. But as we've seen with other cases where there's video evidence, going back to Rodney King, you look at it and you say, wow, how can a jury not convict? But, there's been plenty of cases where the videos have been very detailed and very convincing, but they couldn't get convictions. Eric Gardner is another example that was caught on video. You could see he wasn't resisting. He was saying he couldn't breathe, and still no indictment. So I definitely think that the defense can overcome the video. It's going to boil down to the causation of the cause of death.
And Dr. Getty, I want to stick on these videos with you for just a moment. What are you thinking when you see those videos played over and over?
I guess I've seen stuff like that so many times. It's hard to know what's in the officer's mind at that time. I know they get hyped up and they get the tunnel vision, and physiological things happen to it if they don't have the practice and the training. So, God, it's inciting, but I think we would find a lot more of that going on if more people had videos.
Mr. Choyce, when it comes to court, we're hearing a lot about use of force. I mean, this is something that the state is driving home, the defense is talking about. How do you think it's going to come into play here?
Well, I think the defense is doing a good job of, raising hypotheticals regarding the use of force, using the storytelling tactics to get the experts to talk about different types of scenarios instead of focusing, solely on what happened in the George Floyd case. And I think they're doing a good job at, using these hypotheticals to talk about whether or not it was reasonable. You have to look at what Officer Chauvin was thinking at the time, his state of mind. He's coming into a situation where the officers are already using force on Floyd in the back seat. He essentially begins using force on George Floyd, and then it begins to escalate. And so the real question is whether that use of force was reasonable, and should he have stopped the use of force once Mr. Floyd was in a prone position and handcuffed and was complying.
Thanks for staying with us. I'm Mike Duffy. Our guests tonight are Dionne Choyce, Sacramento-based criminal defense attorney, and Dr. Ryan Getty, Sac State criminal justice professor who specializes in police behavior. Mr. Choyce, so the defense is really focusing on two things, crowd and drugs, and today it was all about drugs. What do you make of these areas of focus?
I didn't like the fact that they were focusing on the crowd. I think they're going to lose credibility with the jury there. These officers should be trained to, perform their job in high stress situations. This wasn't an angry mob that was out there. They were essentially concerned for the well-being of Mr. Floyd, and they were saying things to that effect, like, get off his neck, he can't breathe. Is there a pulse? Get him some aid. And so I didn't like the fact that they were using the crowd as a sort of a red herring to say that Officer Chauvin would have been distracted and wouldn't be able to focus on what he was doing. If these officers can't perform in high stress situations, they should, find another job.
And how about you think Mr. Floyd potentially being on drugs at the time? Is that a smart thing to focus on?
I think that's very smart because it's going to play into their causation theory, and they're going to use that to sort of murk up the DA's theory of the case, and use that to say, look, he was in the car, he was complaining of being claustrophobic, he was complaining of having COVID, and he was using drugs. All of those things are factors to consider in determining his cause of death.
And how about you, Dr. Getty? How are you seeing this focus on drugs from your perspective?
Well, they obviously have to make some kind of defense, and once they start attacking the victim, I've never liked that tactic. I believe one should focus on the professionalism, and I think we're past that professionalism of the police department, the very good training, that they were a veteran and maybe haven't had any prior complaints, something like that. I don't really like it when they go at the victim.
Well, we have heard from some high-ranking Minneapolis police officials. So let me start with you, Mr. Choyce. How damaging is testimony from people like that?
Well, it's very good for the prosecution in terms of these witnesses are all from the Minneapolis Police Department. They're high-ranking officers. They're essentially the supervisors of Derek Chauvin, and they're all saying that he used excessive force. So that's very powerful pieces of evidence.
Yeah, Dr. Getty, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I was asking you, is this a sign that there's some sort of deterioration of that thin blue line of silence, or that, code of silence crumbling? What do you think?
I would think that if there were more line officers coming in to testify, but I can definitely see the position of the chief and the higher ranking officers. I kind of have to go with their leadership, who they answer to, go, because they're looking at a civil file, later on. But just to be called there and have to say what they have to say is pretty remarkable.
It is remarkable, and we don't really hear much from police, at least past criminal cases. One of the first times that I've seen the chief actually come to the stand. Do you think it's a sign of anything changing at all?
No, I before, when I had hoped that once the Rodney King finding, I thought a lot of things would change, and it really hasn't. They haven't upped the educational standards for officers. They haven't given them any more in-service training. They haven't really done the stuff that I thought would change the industry before. So this is just another lose-lose situation. you can't make anyone whole again, and it's super unfortunate.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, because a lot of people are saying, they're using this phrase, defund the police. But is that the right answer, Dr. Getty?
That's actually going to make it worse. I know in talking with officers are kind of slowing down, not seeing things that they would normally see. They're also worried about, their commanders or the chief not having their back. So they're not hiring as many officers. And if we did do community policing as we were supposed to do, then we would know these people and these communities and be able to better deal with situations that just shouldn't happen.
So maybe redirect more toward training. All right. Mr. Choyce, I just want to kind of circle back about how this case is going overall. How would you say the state is doing so far?
I think the state is presenting a solid case so far. I think they're adjusting their theory to some of the defense, tactics. For example, there was a lot of back and forth about Chauvin's knee being either on the neck or the shoulder blade or the back. And I think the prosecution is picking up on some of those cues and expanding their theory to say that, well, even if his knee was on the shoulder or the neck, he still was in a prone position and handcuffed. They should have got him up and got him up very quickly once he stopped resisting.
And how about the defense? How do you think they're doing?
I think the defense is doing a pretty good job, considering how tough a case it is. We've all seen the video, and you look at it and you say, well, what type of defense are they going to be able to present? But I think they're doing a pretty good job at peppering the case and creating some holes. It'll just, I still think the biggest challenge is going to be the medical evidence, and they're going to have their hands full there.
Okay, I'll let that be the last word. My guest tonight, Dionne Choyce, Sacramento-based criminal defense attorney, and Dr. Ryan Getty, Sac State criminal justice professor. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you, sir.
Day 9 of the Chauvin trial continues tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night.